I remember nothing between my stealing out of the house and starting down the empty street toward the orphanage grounds, and my waking up the next day to see my grim-faced parents at the foot of my bed, and to be told by a doctor busily extracting some kind of tube from my nose that I was a patient in Beth Israel Hospital, and that though I probably had a terrible headache, I was going to be all right. My head did hurt excruciatingly, but it wasn't from a blood clot's putting pressure on the brain, a possibility they feared when I was found bleeding and unconscious, and not because there was brain damage. X-rays ruled out a skull fracture, and the neurological examination showed no damage to the nerves, other than a 3-inch long laceration requiring 18 stitches that were removed the following week, and the fact that I had no memory of the blow itself. Nothing serious was wrong with me. A routine concussion, the doctor said, and that's all that was causing the pain, as well as the anemia. I'd probably never remembered being kicked by the horse, or the series of events leading to that collision, but the doctor said that was routine too. Otherwise, my memory was intact. Luckily, he used the word several times, and it sounded like ridicule in my aching head. They kept me for observation all that day and overnight, rousing me just about every hour to be sure I didn't slip into unconsciousness again. And the next morning I was discharged and instructed only to go easy with physical activities for a week or two. My mother had taken off from work to be with me at the hospital, and she was there to take me home on the bus. Because my head didn't stop hurting for some 10 days, and because there was nothing to be done about it, I was kept home from school, but otherwise I was said to be fine, and fine thanks primarily to Selden, who from a distance had witnessed almost everything that I was unable to remember. If Selden hadn't sneaked out of bed when he heard me coming down the back stairs, hadn't followed me in the dark along Summit Avenue and across the high school playing field to the Goldsmith Avenue side of the orphanage, and through the unlatched gate into the orphanage woods, I probably would have lain there unconscious in his clothes until I bled to death. Selden ran all the way back to our house, woke my parents, who immediately dialed the operator for help, and got in our car with them, and directed them to the very spot where I was. It was by then close to 3 in the morning and pitch black. Kneeling beside me on the damp ground, my mother pressed a towel she'd brought with her against my head to staunch the bleeding, while my father covered me with an old picnic blanket that was in the trunk of the car and kept me warm until the ambulance arrived. My parents organized my rescue, but Selden Wishnow saved my life. I had apparently startled the two horses when, disoriented, I began stumbling about in the dark where the woods opened out into the farming field. And when I turned to try to escape the horses and make it back to the streets through the woods, one of them reared up. I tripped and fell, and the other horse, in fleeing, nicked me with a high hoof on the back of my skull. For weeks, Selden recounted excitedly to me, and of course to the entire school, every detail of my nocturnal attempt to run away from home and be taken in by the nuns as a familyless child, in his telling savoring particularly the mishap with the workers, as well as the fact that outdoors in the middle of the night, barefoot and in just his pajamas, he had twice traversed the mile of abrasive terrain between the orphanage woods and our house. Unlike his mother and my parents, Selden couldn't get over the thrill of discovering that it was he who had inexplicably lost his clothes. That it wasn't he who had inexplicably lost his clothes, but I who had stolen them to use for my getaway. This utter improbability established as never before a value to his own existence that had previously escaped his attention, telling the story with all the prestige of Savior and co-conspirator both, and showing everyone who'd look at them his scraped feet, seemed to make Selden significant at last, even in his own eyes, a daredevil of a boy able to compel a hero's attention for the first time in his life, while I was devastated not only by the shame of it, which was more unbearable and longer lasting than the headache, but because my stamp album, my greatest treasure, that which I could not live without, was gone. I didn't remember having taken it with me until the day after I got home from the hospital and got up in the morning to get dressed and saw it was missing from beneath my socks and my underwear. The reason I stored it there in the first place was so as to see it first thing every morning when I dressed for school, and now the first thing I saw on my first morning home was the biggest thing I had ever owned was gone and irreplaceable, like and utterly unlike losing a leg. "Ma!" I shouted. "Ma, something terrible happened." "What is it?" she cried and came running from the kitchen into the room. "What's wrong?" She thought, of course, I'd begun to bleed from my stitches, or that I was about to faint, or that the headache was more than I could stand. "My stamps!" That was all I could say, and she was able to figure out the rest. What she did then was to go looking for them. All alone, she went into the orphanage woods and searched the grounds where I'd been discovered, but she was unable to find the album anywhere, found not so much as a single stamp. "Are you sure you had them?" she asked when she got home. Yes, they're there. They have to be there. I can't lose my stamps." But I looked and looked. I looked everywhere. "But who could have taken them? Where could they be? They're mine. We've got to find them. They're my stamps." I was inconsolable. I envisioned a horde of orphans, spotting the album in the woods and tearing it apart with their filthy hands. I saw them pulling out the stamps and eating them and stomping on them and flushing them by the handfuls down the toilet in their terrible bathroom. They hated the album because it wasn't theirs. They hated the album because nothing was theirs. Because I asked her to, my mother told neither my father nor my brother what had become of my stamps or about the money in Selden's pants. "In the pocket when we found you, there were $19.50. I don't know where it came from, and I don't want to know. The episode is over and done with. I opened a savings account for you at the Howard Savings Bank. I deposited it there for your future." She handed me a little bank book with my name written inside it, and $19.50, the first and only item stamped in black on the deposit page. "Thank you," I said, and then she made the judgment of her second son that I believe she carried with her into her grave. "You are the strangest child," she told me. "I had no idea," she said. "I didn't begin to know." And then she handed me my letter opener, the maintained pewter musket from Mount Vernon. The stock was scratched and dirty, and the bayonet bent slightly out of shape. She had found it that afternoon when, unknown to me, she had raced back from work at lunch hour and returned for a second time to comb through the soil of the orphanage woods in search of the tiniest remnant of the stamp collection that had dissolved into thin air. And that is the end of Chapter 6.